Hi everybody. So there was a request for me to get further into this deck after my unboxing and quick flip through as well as first impression of this deck that I posted the other day. I am very happy with this as a study deck, as a historical deck that I investigate further from the perspective of art history, and history of symbology and history of culture, but not necessarily as a history of, say, playing cards or as history of tarot. The Tarocchi del Mantegna, 15th century by Il Meneghello. This is the reproduction is by Il Meneghello Edizioni, Milano, Italy. The deck itself has been attributed to Mantegna, although because it's not signed, this has to be hypothesized that Mantegna did these images. And in this book by Christina Dorsini, who's the daughter of Osvaldo Menegazzi, the main man behind Il Meneghello, thus far, she's an art historian, and so she explained briefly all the variety of facts, historical facts, which led them to conclude in terms of stylistically, in terms of the timing, in terms of similarities with other artists in Italy at the time and across Europe as well. They've concluded this is from the 1400s and it's from Ferrara in Italy and by the artist Mantegna. And so I will not get into that here, but if you would like me to get into the more art historical side of things, do let me know and I'll do that in a separate video. So there's all this, she explained quite clearly why this has been attributed to Mantegna, Ferrara, and the 1400s. So let us, first of all, or before we go to the box, I also want to emphasize one more time that this book is mainly, if not exclusively, coming from the art history framework. It will be discussing the images from the perspective of an art historian, because she is an art historian. So if you are looking for information outside of that framework, you may not find that here, and you may have to find that elsewhere. So having noted that, let's have a look at the box. I Tarocchi del Mantegna, 15th century, Il Meneghello Edizioni, Milano, Italy. It has the look and feel of the uniquely Il Meneghello handcrafted boxes there, which is something I'm extremely relieved about because I really do not like their new boxes. They just feel too mass-produced to me. The other unique thing that I found quite unique in this instance is this lid, because usually that's how they usually come, at least in recent editions. The other thing that is unique here is the stamp or the wax seal. The wax seal here is that logo, and as you can see, compare that to the right. I believe the one on the right is Osvaldo Menegazzi's own personal seal, while the left, I don't know, I don't want to say it's Christina Dorsini's personal seal, but it looks like more of a corporate seal with that, the corporate logo, for lack of a better term, which is that one there. So the box is quite lovely and large compared to one of my larger boxes from Il Meneghello. It is slightly wider and of course also taller. Compare it to a much or a slightly taller box, that is the Hokusai Tarot. It is the Hokusai Tarot is slightly slimmer and slightly longer. There it is. So it's a lovely and large. I love that. Personally, I do. So that's the box. We'll put that aside. The deck of cards. It consists of 50 cards in a structure of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 10 cards or 10 images each. This actually reminds me very much of the trumps in the tarot cards that consist of 78 cards that we are more familiar today. The difference is that in those trumps you have 22 images and 22 cards. Here you have 50. So this has the feel of the majors only deck. This has a feel of trumps only. The same sense of this allegory, this metaphor of the evolution of the soul, of the evolution of the ascent of human from a lower or low level of existence to a highest form of existence. And so we start here with what they call the beggar or the miserable, and it ends with the Pope. So I am going to show you images in the book rather than flip through the cards, because it's just the way I am set up here, it's really awkward for me, because there's just not enough room. So, and also because the images are pretty clear and comparable to the cards. So as you can see here, it is almost as big as the card, and because it's black and white, of course it is clearer, it's much sharper in the, on the cards, but so I'll do that. And in various points I will have to go to the cards because some of the cards talk to each other, that sort of thing. So let's start with this. So the 5 levels, the 5 structure are conditions of man. It's called Series E here in the book. And then here, the Muses and Apollo, or Series D, Sciences and Arts, C, Ethical and Cosmological Principles, B, the Planets and the Stars, Series A. So let's start with E, Conditions of Man over here. We start with the beggar. It's the lowest, and it is lonely, old, basically looking quite miserable. That's the name, the miserable. And but he looks hopeful as he looks towards the future for something better. It is also thought of as representing birth because it's at the beginning of the whole set. And it is also it's interesting here. The other thing that you need to note is that the English language in the book is a little awkward. Now, I am myself a speaker of English as a second language, so you probably think that the way I speak English is a bit odd, but I am used to reading English because I have to, and I do feel that the English here is a little awkward, which makes me think that it has been translated by someone who doesn't, whose English isn't their first language. So let's continue here. It's just that when I read this out to you, it might just sound a little different from how these expressions are, for how you normally hear these expressions. So here it says, the beggar may represent also the birth, the beginning, as it is the first card of the deck, which counterposes to the first cause, the 50th card of the deck. So this is the first card, and the last card is this prima causa, the prime cause. So the first card and the last card there. So we'll put that aside. And this, you can see the analogy, or you can see here like it's almost reminiscent of the Fool in a way. So that's that. And it moves to, here's the servant. The servant here represents the second step of the social scale. Christina Dorsini suggested that this is some kind of social redemption, so that the servant is kept in comfort, his house is fed in exchange for his services. And he is usually depicted or considered as humble and simple. And then we move to the second one, the artisan or the craftsman. Here, it has been likened to the magician in the tarot that we are more familiar with. And so here, that sort of humbleness and humility is still there. That's his apprentice over there, and he's doing his craft with skills there. And so the elevation, in a way, from the servant to the crafts or artisan or craftsman here is that he has the power to create. He has skills. And so that's different from the servant who, is humble, is simple, and is basically paying his keep. And then we move on to the merchant, who isn't very humble anymore, but he's in a very comfortable material position. And it's almost as if he has reached some level of wealth that the others have not possesses. This material comfort that is beyond the other that came before him, the miserable, the servant, and the craftsman. However, he has lack of humility at the expense of this almost spiritual integrity almost. And then you move to the next one, where the balance seems to be, where the balance between the material and the spiritual seems to be corrected. Here you have the attributes of loyalty, regality, and virtue. And so a nobleman is someone who is powerful in the material world, but he is perceived as having in him, embedded in him. When I say him, I'm using the him as a sort of royal him, royal sort of, so please allow me, it's just easier that way rather than saying he, she all the time. And so he's embedded with this integrity of the spirit that is loyalty, regality, and virtue. And then we move on to the knight. And the knight here is even more elevated in his sense of spiritual integrity, in that he's now concerned with justice and courage. He's now concerned with bigger things, bigger morality, or the kind of virtues that involve society at large. And then we have the doge. I think you pronounce that doge. Here we have power. And so finally there is that other level of the human evolution. We have the justice and courage, and he may represent all the men who are in front of a difficult choice, and he is the example to follow, is the knight. And then you have the power here. And the doge, it says in the book here, may represent Francesco Foscari himself, which was the 65th doge of Venice and had the most long-lasting power in the entire history of Venetian doges from 1423 to 1457. His reign was characterized by wars, natural disasters, and many feuds among several families. These events influenced his whole life. Different from the other characters, which had prestige and prosperity, he also has the power. And then it says, from now on, the characters will be important and powerful, such as the king, the emperor, and the pope. And so this is the entry level of that power. And then it moves to the king here. And the king here is depicted as young, as powerful, as in command. And so it represents physical strength. And it also noted that the image of the king here very much reminiscent of the King of Wands. This stick here is a command of his symbol, and he has more power than the doge just now, which actually had more prestige than power. So it was proposed that this doge here has power, but perhaps his power is more in the prestige, because ultimately he's still subjected to the king. And then we move to the emperor. The emperor here is depicted as older, indicating wisdom, but also the sense of worry here in the face, looking down at that globe. If we look at the king is very confident, looking quite pleased with himself, looking up this way, looking at us. Here it's sort of almost stooped over. It says the burden of owing the world, that burden of awareness that he owes the world. So there is that wisdom, there is that awareness, and the burden of that awareness. It's regality and strength in the eagle, and it sort of moved into more mental strength rather than this kind of more physical, material, this worldly strength, the strength of power, the strength of command, the strength of having power over others and over everything around him. Here it's more mental strength, not in terms of overpowering the things around him, but also a strength to manage his own burden. It's sort of almost like it goes internal, and it translates to what we understand as wisdom. And it has been likened to the King of Diamonds. And then we move on to the Pope. So the Pope, finally in the Pope, we have that balance between the earthly power and the spiritual power. Finally, in the Pope, you have that person in the gateway between this world and that world, where he is well versed in that world, and he is as well versed in this world as well. And so there's this almond here, the Vesica Pisces. Is that what you call that? And then the intersection of two circles with the same radius in the middle, and you see this a lot in Thoth tarot and various symbolism. It's also quite common in Christianity. The almond represent two worlds, the material and the spiritual one, and has been used also in Christian iconography related to Jesus Christ. And then you have the papal tiara, and the face again. As you move up in this rank, you have increased in awareness of not only things around you, but also yourself. It's a bit more burdened, a bit more worried, a bit more thoughtful. And then it's interesting that Christina Dorsini commented on the feminine features of the face. And then there is a dog, where somewhere, these dogs here, those 4 heads, 4 there. This one has a shawl for whatever reason, like a scarf. This one doesn't. And then so this is the top of the conditions of men. This is the top level where a person can connect both spiritual power with earthly power. And then we move to the next section, Apollo and the Muses. So this one started with, and pardon mispronunciation in advance, I think you pronounce this Calliope. Anyway, it starts with Calliope. So this is a muse of epic poetry. She is known as the muse of Homer. Of course, Homer, the author of the Iliad. It's very epic. And it has this wind instrument here, which indicate music. And this instrument derives from the antique Greece, where music worked and sight give energy, stimulate activities. And then combining with that idea of music as assisting to generate something new, plus the spring here, the mountains there. The mountain is a symbol of purification and knowledge. And then the spring here, new life. This indicates spring, but also something new. She becomes a symbol of the vital energy present in each human being. And so this is the start of the series, so that's quite understandable that those symbols are there. And then the second here is Urania, muse of astronomy and geometry. Her symbols are math instruments, so I guess that one there. There's a globe in her left hand. And all of these muses in the series have globes except for one. So like that one there is that globe there, the white globe here. And then we move to the next one. This one here, there's the globe there. This one here is Goddess of Dance and Chorus. I'm going to let you try to pronounce that yourself, because I have no idea how to pronounce that. So Goddess of Dance and Chorus, and then we move to Erato, muse of lyric and love poetry. The sphere's there again. And then we move to the next one. Polyhymnia, not sure, but her, there's the sphere again. Muse of the lyric poetry, hymns, and oratory. Orator. In my native language, I say orator. And she's usually depicted as a serious woman. So, and then we have Thalia. She doesn't have a white globe, so that's interesting. And this is muse of comedy, which in the classical iconography is painted with a comic mask in one hand and a pastoral stick in the other. So previously in the introduction here, which I skipped because it's very much it's very much an art history essay, really. It says that because in the 1400s there's all this harkening back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and of course the Renaissance is this idea of returning back to the ancestor of Western cultures, really, which is ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And if memory serves me right from my high school history lessons, the Renaissance period really hit its height in the 1500s. And of course, this is the 1400s or mid 1400s. And the period estimation of mid 1400s very much relate to a variety of stylistic pinpointers, as well as the context within which this art seemed to have existed in terms of other artwork in the 1400s. Like one is the Della Francesca, which is a very famous painter from the 1400s, and apparently a lot of the images here resembles Della Francesca's work, and he was working in the mid 1400s. And so that's just one thing that Christina Dorsini discussed in terms of attributing these images to that period in time, to that region, and to that artist. So we're moving to this particular here. This one here is Muse of the Music, Chorus, and specifically of Tragedy. So she looks really sad. I'm sorry, that's out of frame. She looks really sad there. And so playing a horn while her face is sad, it says. And there's the sphere again. And then we move to this one here, Muse of Lyric Poetry and of Music. And so some of these muses are depicted according to their classical iconography. Some of them have been modified. So this one here apparently is depicted exactly in a way that she has been depicted in classical times, which is during the ancient Greece and ancient Roman time. This one here is Muse of History. And is there a globe? No, there's no globe. Oh, there it is. There's a globe there. And there's the swan. And so the swan iconography reminds me, let me jump. This is one of those trajectories that I found quite fascinating that I really ought to be talking in a different video. But the connected and free oracle, alchemist's oracle, do you remember there's a lot of symbolism that doesn't seem to connect directly to the keywords on some cards, one of which is the swan. And I Googled swan and divinity and god and goddesses, and I hit a page about Leda and the swan, and how the swan was Zeus, and Zeus was taking liberties on Leda, which isn't a very nice story. But also here I saw the iconography of swans related to Apollo, related to a variety of gods and goddesses. And so if you have the connected and free alchemist's oracle with the swan and the keyword that seems completely unrelated to a swan, I have concluded, I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but that swan obviously is a symbol of the presence of divinity. So going back to this, Muse of History, here Cleo here loses every link with the classical iconography, which painted her with a parchment on the hand, so she's no longer holding a parchment in a way that she's usually depicted in classical art. She's the first of 9 muses and received the power to transmit memories of events and characters. So in antique times, Cleo was evoked by poets who wanted to write about historic events. The legend tells that Orpheus was born by the union of Cleo and Apollo. This is the reason why in these cards she is the last muse before Apollo's card. What recalls Apollo too in this card is the swan, a sacred animal, symbol of beauty, connected to the beauty of the muse. So there it is. And so the here represents the communication among elements and different worlds, as it has magic powers related to music and chorus. The swan also represents the internal light and the harmony of the human spirit, the divine spark in men. So if you have the Connected and Free Alchemist Oracle, take a look at your swan card. Indeed, Cleo is on the swan's back with open wings upon a lake. Her gaze is oriented towards right, while her left hand holds the dress. The white globe is always present, which in this case is on Muse's left upon the swan. That's the other thing. In this book, when she said left, it's the left of the character, not your left. So when she said left, it's this one here, not that one there. So here is Apollo, and there's a swan here. So Apollo is the guide of the muses, and he is the last card of this section. He is represented according to medieval iconography's view, represented as the crowned seated king. With his famous attributes, the bay, I think that's the bay leaf there, and the scepter down there. His throne is made of 2 swans, his symbols, with their long necks. His left hand holds a branch of bay, symbol of victory. The scepter is the globe underneath his feet, leaned on it. And you see what I mean by the English is a little awkward. On his right hand, he has a little stick with which he indicates something on the globe. The globe consists of lands and starry skies, maybe elements related to Apollo's power as oracle, able to disclose man's future thanks to Pythia's help. Here Apollo is represented as a worried god, thoughtful, as he is suffering for the world's destiny. On the right, there is an image that may represent a familiar emblem but lacking specific meaning. Not quite sure what emblem that is. Oh, that one there. Oh, that's interesting. That reminds me of where the host is placed in Catholic churches. So you put the host in the middle there usually, and you have this sort of bright shining sun-like rays, and then you have the cross on top. I don't know. I'm not saying that's what that is, but that reminds me of that. And so here it has that echo of the emperor, where the emperor is a bit worried, of the burden of his own responsibility to the world. There he is, like he owes the world. And here, he is a power oracle, and so he can see man's future, and he's worried, really. He's suffering for the world's destiny, so that sounds a little bit like Jesus. And then we go to the sciences and the arts, this one here. Series C, or the C stack, whatever you call it. This is the one that I found a little bit, the muses in this one here I found interesting, but I'm not as excited about them. No, actually that's not true. The sciences and the art, yes. The one that I'm most excited about is the ethical and cosmological principles, because they have a lot of similarities to the tarot trumps that we know. So the sciences and the arts started with grammar. So started with grammar here, and logic, rhetoric, geometry, arithmetic, music. There's a swan again. She's represented here in a completely different way than the classical way of representing music. So there's the swan. The presence of the swan is probably due to the fact that music is strictly linked to the muses. So once again, a symbol of Apollo, god of music and poetry, led of the muses. And then there's poetry here. It is associated with fame and immortal glory. So the sphere now has like this land and star instead of stars, instead of empty. Poetry shows shows as music Apollo's attributes. Again, the same sphere of Apollo and the muses section is present, a globe with fields and starry skies. And then poetry is playing a lute with only her right hand. And then the laurel crown reminds, again alluded to Apollo there, being one of his attributes, the laurel that is, represent fame and immortal glory. And then we go to philosophy here. So philosophy, or love of knowledge, is depicted as a woman with armor. In medieval thought, according to which philosophy was mother and queen of all the liberal arts, and here she is represented while defending them. This iconography is strictly associated to the medieval thoughts, which says that philosophy was the mother and queen of all liberal arts. So it is interesting to note what is reported on the shield. It is the immortal central head of Hydra, the nine-headed sea serpent. And Christina Dorsini theorized that this has something to do with Plato in his book called The Republic. In Book 9, Plato talked about the nature of psyche, and he was talking about defeating the nine-headed sea serpent or Hydra. Astrology or astronomy. And then the highest of all this section of liberal arts in, what was it again? The sciences and the arts. The highest in this succession is theology. Theology is a discipline that studies God or the characters that religion associate with the divine as such. The term theology appears for the first time in the 4th century BC in Plato's Republic, Book 2. She is depicted with a double head. The female figure gazes upwards. The old bearded man looks downward. Looks down. The two characters could symbolize the relation between heaven, woman, and the earth, man, between God and mankind. Below them, a big celestial globe covers their legs and the final part of the card, representing maybe the center of the universe. In fact, the vision of the world in ancient religiosity was based on the correspondence between heaven and earth. It was believed that between them there were invisible connections and open gates. And this reminds me of Waite, Arthur Edward Waite's depiction of the lovers, where Eve looks up to the angel and Adam, or the male figure, looks towards the female figure, and the female figure looks up towards the angel, if you recall that. Give me a minute. There it is. He looks to her, she looks up. He looks down, she looks up. He looks towards earth, she looks towards heaven. Okay, so, and then we go to the ethical and cosmological principles. And I have so much to say here, but I'm not going to talk about that now. In any case, just a really messy notes there. So there are 4 cardinal virtues: temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. And then there are 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. Total, they're called the 7 virtues. The 4 cardinal virtues is called here, is under the banner of ethical principles. And the 3 theological virtues is the cosmological principles, or the spirit. So ethical and cosmological principles. Ethical being the 4 cardinal virtues, cosmological being the 3 theological virtues. And if you look at these names, you would know why I'm so fascinated with these guys, with this particular section. I mean, look at the names: temperance, fortitude, prudence, justice, faith, hope, charity. Sounds familiar to you? Yeah, it sounds familiar to me. So let's start with this one here. So Iliaco, I think that's Iliaco. So there it is. That reminds me of the Visconti, the sun in the Visconti Sforza with the child holding up a sun that has a face. And speaking of suns with faces, obviously that tradition goes back a long time. So it says here, Iliaco is the genius or spirit of the sun, or in the astronomical language, the heliacal rising that indicates the motion of a star in relation to the sun. I have no idea what that is. It stands for the event of rising of a star at dawn before sunrise, and I underline that, rising of a star at dawn before sunrise. The reason why I underline it is something to do with my reflection of one of the Visconti decks, which I will talk about in a separate video. So we'll move in. This is Chronico, time. Cosmico, universe. Now we enter this virtues here, temperance. The first of the 4 cardinal virtues. Prudence, mirror, indicating that, symbolizing being aware of danger that is coming from behind, also self-knowledge. The snake or the dragon here, symbolizing wisdom. The wise old man at the back looking behind, indicating experience or the necessity of experience and being prudent. So just to read bits of the passage here, it's shown with the usual attributes of a mirror and a snake, which look a bit like a dragon. And this derives from Matthew's Gospel 10:16. I think that means chapter 10, verse 16. It's sort of written in that kind of way. In the Bible, it's usually 10, column 16. So anyway, see, I send you out as sheep among wolves. Be then as wise as snakes and as gentle as doves. So that's the passage from Matthew chapter 10, verse 16. Here, prudence has a slightly different iconography. A figure in profile shows a feminine aspect, which handles in her hand a mirror, supported by a small winged cherub, while reflecting herself. The left profile is masculine, bearded, with a hooked nose. He holds a compass in his hand, meaning the measurement of every action. It is the character of a wise old man who indicates that prudence cannot be divided from experience. At the feet of the character on the left side, there is a little dragon, which should represent the snake, symbol of wisdom, acting against adversities. Ancient symbol of the time, the snake reminds also of the fact that the prudence is the figure of experience. The mirror means that the virtue requires self-knowledge as a preliminary condition for the fulfillment of good, but also to see any possible dangers coming from behind. I really like that. And if you look at the Visconti deck from the Carriel, collection, you see this figure, and I have a few things to say about that. So this one here is Fortitude, and if you remember the lion, of course, but if you remember the column from, there's a Minchiati deck, Etruria, I think, where strength, it has a column, and the Fine della Torre as well, strength has a column behind them, I believe. Is that right? Might be confusing my decks there, but anyway, that column associated with strength is something, again, I'll talk about that in a separate video. So here, sustaining a broken, so she's holding up this broken column here, lion at her feet, and she's armored, and her armor look like a lion face there, as well as her helmet there. Her strength does not involve violence. It is a moral quality instead, which reveals strength in her character. So she also theorized that the broken column here represent Samson, a biblical hero who destroyed the temple of the god Dagon after the Philistines captured him and made him blind. And the column by itself stands for inner strength. And then the lion may refer to, may be alluding to an iconography of Hercules, mythological hero who defeated the lion of Nemea, suffocating it only by his hands in the first of the 12 labors. And then she's holding a weapon there. The column and the column and the lion are often used to represent this virtue. The weapon, the column, and the lion. The feminine figure in profile presents a dress shaped in the face of the lion here, and also the helmet. And this again underline the value of strength and courage of the lion. And her left hand holds the upper part of the broken column. This one holds a weapon similar to spiked mace, and the lion appear here. So basically moral quality, strength of character, inner strength and courage. Justice. Sword, impartial power. Scales, symbolizing equity. Heron with stone down there is symbolizing the irrelevancy of emotions. It also symbolizes mediation and gift of balance. Apparently in classical depiction of it, the stone is between the heron's beak instead of its claw. So heron is apparently sacred to Athena and is a messenger of Athena as well as symbol of justice. Charity. So here, again, I have something to say about charity and the fire, flame, and all this sort of in relation to my thoughts about my major arcana triad, as well as some of the trump cards from the Carriel collection of the Visconti decks, again in a separate video. So here, according to traditional representation, Charity is a woman nursing her sons. And then here though, it's that, again, that nursing her sons made me think of the Carriel, and again, I'll talk about that in a separate video. But here, she's a woman opening her dress near the heart here, and then flames come out, as you can see. So Charity is fire which warms. She's passion that moves. So Charity is likened to flames and fire and passion that move things. So there's the flame over there. Also offer abundance in this particular depiction. Charity is the highest of the 3 theological virtues and is also the bond to the other virtues which she animates, inspires, and controls. And then there is a pelican here. Apparently, the pelican here is depicted opening up its wing, feeding its young with its blood, packing its chest. You can see the young one packing its chest, clearly a symbol of charity. The pelican was once in the Christian iconography symbol of familial love, sacrifice, and altruism. The classical iconography representation, while lacerating its chest to feed its young ones, derives from the fact that the animal grinds the fishes that it keeps in the swelling of its throat, so it presses its chest to let the food out, giving the impression that it lacerates its chest to let the blood out for its young ones. Isn't that fascinating? And then we have Hope. Here's Hope. Hope is shown as a feminine figure with hands folded, staring at the right corner, almost ecstatic, where it is possible to glimpse a lighting flap from which she waits for salvation. A typical attribute is missing in this representation, the anchor. Present instead in another famous representation of Hope belonging to the 15th century, the Carriel Visconti Tarot. So there's a phoenix here, a firebird representing long life and rebirth from ashes, spiritual rebirth, divine wisdom, and in the 4th